working within the military-industrial complex just cemented that even more for me. I just saw so much waste, and I can't even get into the ridiculousness of some of the projects that I worked on.
These are basically the issue set for what we now call Make America Healthy Again in the United States. And it is fascinating to watch people, primarily coming from the left, realizing that they were more libertarian all along, but they didn't identify with that word.
Right.
Who grew up during Mao's Cultural Revolution. We actually got her to start telling stories that she had never told before about how neighbors turned against them because they were the wrong kind of family. They were not they were not a red family. They were a black family, and there were two classes of citizens. And if you were a black family, you were punished and jailed and beaten and on and on and on. So I think those kinds of stories can really affect people.
Hello and welcome to the IEA podcast. My name is Reem Ibrahim and I'm a communications manager here at the Institute of Economic Affairs. Today I am absolutely delighted to be joined by Matt and Terry Kibbe, a libertarian power couple in the movement. I didn't really sort of put much thought into what I wanted to ask you guys today. I wanted to hear a bit about your lives and what your perspective is on your intellectual journey now upon reflection. And then we'll also talk a little bit about the future of the liberty movement as well. So, Terry, I'll start with you. How did you become a libertarian? What does your intellectual journey look like? And what is it that kind of convinced you that actually the state should be much smaller than it is at the moment?
So I like the fact that you did not put a lot of time and preparation into this talk, because we believe that spontaneous order, or as we call it, beautiful chaos, is actually the best path forward, which I guess might actually describe my, quote, intellectual journey. I started out my career as an engineer. Matt and I met at Grove City College, which is a very small private college that teaches Austrian economics, although that was not my major. I did engineering. Started dating Matt in college, so that might have had some little bit of influence on me. But I started my career working as an engineer in the Defense Department. And I always had libertarian tendencies, and it all just kind of made sense. And working within the military-industrial complex just cemented that even more for me. I just saw so much waste, and I can't even get into the ridiculousness of some of the projects that I worked on, and recognize that I just couldn't do that for a living for my life, because I would just go stir crazy. I would come home from work and talk about this, multi-million-dollar system that we put together and sold off to the government, and all they did with it was take it to another contractor 2 blocks away and take it apart, because that was cheaper than canceling the contract for equipment. So my head would have just exploded. And so at some point I decided that it was frustrating and also very boring doing what I was doing, and decided to then move into the public policy space. Matt was already in that world. And so I started working as a fundraiser, as a development director, and have worked my way up through various institutions. I was at the Cato Institute, Competitive Enterprise Institute. But I've always just at my core believed that individuals are better off making decisions for themselves rather than the government.
That's fascinating. And Matt, what about yourself? How did you become a libertarian? And also, how would you define that term yourself?
Sure, but Terry buried the most important moment in our early romantic lives.
I was going to skip over that Christmas gift, the very first Christmas we were together.
What was the gift?
The fountainhead.
Of course it was. It starts with Ayn Rand, doesn't it? But otherwise does.
Which is, so I started off being a libertarian. I think I was born that way. I think I'm one of those weird natural libertarians that are a combination of independent and stubborn. But
you were how old when you read Human Action?
16. So
I love it.
And she's the only girl that decided that was okay. Because it's a horrible dating strategy.
Have you heard of Little Fun Mises?
Yes.
That was great first date trip.
But it is relevant to what we do today at Free the People, because I was turned on to libertarian ideas listening to a rock album by a band called Rush. And certain people of my generation realized that Rush is where they discovered libertarianism too, because they dedicate an album to the genius of Ayn Rand. And at 13 years old, I said, "Who's that dude?" I had no idea who it was, but her name was unique. It sticks in your head. I discovered her tiny novel Anthem and devoured that, and eventually went and found her other writings, her other books, her nonfiction books. And she says in one of her books, if you want to understand economics, read the Austrians, read Ludwig von Mises. So being a weird and awkward libertarian 16-year-old boy, I went and found a copy. But the fun part of this story, I think, strategically, is it wasn't human action that turned me on to libertarianism. It was a musical album followed by a whodunit novel, a dystopian story about authoritarians and these heroes and heroines rising up against that. I think a powerful story is so important to what we do because only a few people are as weird as me, and only a few people are as weird as Terry willing to marry someone as weird as me.
All right, well, you're bearing your lead, too, because you're not talking about how you became an economics major at Grove City College.
How did you become an economics major at City College?
Funny that you should ask. So I went to Grove City College. I didn't want to go to college. My dad and I got into an argument. Dads win these arguments. So I literally said, fine, I'll go there. It was the college down the street from where I lived.
Yes.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
And I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was reading all these books, but I didn't had any idea that you could turn these values and ideas into a career. So I'm like, I'll be a biology major.
Because he liked the movie Jaws.
It's a cool movie.
It's a good movie. I mean, I'd be that.
But I went to college. I didn't want to be there. I didn't enjoy biology. I'm flunking out. And in the midst of all this, I get into a beer-soaked, drunken argument with one of my fraternity brothers, a guy named Peter Boettke, who is one of the preeminent Austrian professors today. And I start quoting Mises and Hayek and Adam Smith, and there's no girls around, so naturally we're going to argue about
Well, there were girls around. They were just not paying any attention. They were not.
We're listening about economics.
And he's like, if you read this stuff, did you know that the professor, the chairman of the economics department, actually got his PhD from Mises? I'm like, I didn't know that. So I switched the next day, and I had met Terry almost precisely at the same time. So to the day they died, my parents believed that Terry saved me from being a hobo.
Oh my God.
Because if he's stubborn, and so if he doesn't like something or doesn't want to, he just doesn't do it.
Yeah.
And so he didn't like biology, so he wasn't studying and truly was flunking out. And then he found his passion. And they were truly convinced that because I was a studious engineering major, that he was spending all of his time in the library with me studying, and that's why his grades went up.
That is absolutely wonderful.
They didn't know that my grades actually dropped when we started dating because I was spending more time at parties with him than in the library.
With you. What it sounds like then is that you helped him, but he definitely did not help you with your education.
Oh.
Although maybe the gifting of an Ayn Rand book at Christmas maybe particularly positive. That's really interesting. I'm quite interested in your journey towards Austrian economics because I mean, obviously, a lot of people tend to classify being in the Austrian school, indeed believing in the sort of quantity theory of money as like libertarian ideas, or they don't always go hand in hand. We recently had an event at the IEA where somebody is a libertarian and they said that they didn't believe in the quantity theory of money. So could you tell a bit about that particular journey?
Sure. So I think about this in two ways. So I started off reading Ayn Rand, and she teaches you as a refugee of the Bolshevik Revolution who left her family and her life behind to come to America when she was 20, 21. She taught me to not trust authority and to fight for yourself and to be an individualist and not let other people dictate the terms of your life. But the other half of that coin I actually get from Friedrich Hayek, because he teaches me the power of community and how it is that people can come together in cooperation and mutual respect and create what my professor at George Mason called a greater social intelligence. Now that sounds kind of commie, but it's not, because it is this process of people in their particular time and place with their special passions and their special abilities coming together, trying to figure out how to live in the world. And the world is a radically uncertain place. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. And the key insight of Austrians was that economics is not an equation. Humans are not numbers. We're not data points in an equation. We're acting individuals that live in this radically uncertain world, and we're trying to figure out how to live in the future and how to do better and how to provide for our families. That to me is probably why so many libertarians are attracted to Austrians and otherwise. And when it comes to money, this is part of sort of the Austrian way of thinking about the world. The founder of the Austrian school is a guy named Karl Menger, and one of his most important books was about the theory of money. And basically it comes down to money is not something that the government prints. Money is something that people, when they're struggling to figure out how to live their lives, they needed a medium of exchange. So they started without any rules, deciding that certain things were better for that, eventually deciding on things like gold as something that would hold its value. So instead of me trading a cow for 20 chickens, maybe I just want one chicken.
Yeah.
So this medium of exchange is an important role, but it's most important to understand that money is what people think it is. It's not what the government dictates it is. And when the government takes that away from us, the temptation, which we're now living through today, is that they debase your money by printing more and more of it. So if you want to know what inflation is, it is simply the government printing more money. Or in this day and age, it's expanding credit. It's digital. It's not actual paper. So it's a metaphor. But the reason things are so expensive is because the government has been stealing out of your wallet by making every single bill worth less than it was before. And it's fundamentally a transfer from the working class to the wealthy, connected people that sort of play the game of inflation. And to me, that's something that I think the left struggles to understand. It's not us versus them when it comes to the working class versus wealthy. It's us versus them, the politically connected, the crony capitalists, the people that play that game against the working class.
I think what's interesting about that is the fundamental difference, I think, between what people think sort of pro-capitalist people believe and the real reality of that. So I think on inflation, I would always define it as there'd be too much money in the economy chasing too few goods. And when the government or the central bank have a monopoly over money creation, of course, that means that they have a control over the money supply. What I find interesting about that particular journey and what that looks like from an economics perspective is actually, if you think that it is the money supply that has that impact, of course, the supply of goods also matters. So things like regulation, things like taxes, they all matter. What's your thoughts on that side of the economy? Either of you.
You're the economist.
So one of our obsessions at Free the People has been the humanitarian catastrophe that was brought on by lockdowns and all of that. And our betters, our masters, decided that there was a magical switch where we could say, we're going to shut off the economy. And then when we need to, we can just flip it back on. In the process, breaking supply chains and breaking all of this complex coordination that happens when people are free to produce. So we had a perfect storm of printing lots of dollars. We're spending trillions and I speak in the American context because for us a trillion is a rounding error.
Girl Scout cookie money.
Girl Scout cookie money. At the same time, crushing the production supply of goods. So it's a perfect storm of, if you're wondering why your groceries now literally cost twice as much as they used to, it's because we punished supply and we punished production and we punished people who worked. We told them they were non-essential. All the while, we're giving away money that's not worth anything. So it's again like a ripoff to the working class on both ends of it. And I think there has to be an understanding that if you want to produce things, you can't overtax them, you can't overregulate them. You certainly can't tell people that they're not allowed to work, but you also need to let people work at a price that they think is fair. And we're constantly like ratcheting up the entry point by which young people can can enter the market.
And I mean, on housing particularly, especially in the UK, I know this is often an issue in some parts of the US, we have a political problem where there are very small groups of people, and we call them the NIMBYs. Does that have common in the US as well?
Much so.
Common?
Yes.
So the NIMBYs, the not in my backyarders, the people that don't want more houses being built in their local areas, actively lobby the government for those special privileges. They lobby the government for less house building, or indeed for them to block house building. So we currently are in a situation in the UK where the regulatory system is so stringent, and politically it's been impossible to build houses because the Conservative government over the last 14 years, most of those older homeowners tended to vote Conservative, and so there was that incentive actively there. It appears as though we are currently at a crossroads where the new government in the UK, the Labour government, seem to not have the NIMBY problem as much because, quite frankly, they don't vote for them, usually. But they don't have that fundamental understanding that actually that there is that conglomerate effect when you liberalise the planning system, or when you build more homes, and when you allow for infrastructure to be built. Now, what you two are absolutely brilliant at, I think, is taking these economic concepts, and indeed taking the concept that the government should stay out of your lives, and that you as an adult should be free to pursue your own happiness and free to pursue your own path towards flourishing. And you take those concepts and you communicate them so effectively. And I work in the communications department at the OEA, so my job is to do exactly that with all of our wonderful academic research. So give us some advice. How do you guys think the best way to actually communicate these ideas to the public are?
Well, that's easy. It's make it personal and tell a story. And so you find a very relatable subject of your films or your shorts, and that's how you do it. One of our, it's interesting, it's our very first documentary that we ever made was called Off the Grid with Thomas Massey. And Thomas is our favorite congressman, and he lives off the grid in Kentucky. And when I say off the grid, he's in a holler to the valley for people not in Kentucky. And he designed and built his own home. And by doing that, I mean, he took the trees that had fallen in the woods on his land and cut them into timbers, dug up the stones from the creek, and built this amazing, and it's big, it's a beautiful home. And he lives this like incredibly like green, like the dream of every environmentalist, that they talk about having when they're flying around on their private jets, going to these conferences all over the world. And so we did this documentary about Thomas, never talking about until the very end that he was a Republican or that he was in Congress. And that film has reached so many people on the other side of the aisle that would have never, ever listened to anything that a Republican Tea Party congressman said. And it's been fascinating. And in fact, we are just about to release a new director's cut of it. And last week, Matt went up to Vermont to speak at a Liberty Food Fest in Bellows Falls, Vermont. And it was about as lefty of an organization, as you could get. The other, one of the other main key speakers was Winona LaDuke, I think, who ran with Ralph Nader. So, so here Matt is, this crazy libertarian, but able to reach this community with our message, which is very, very libertarian. Just live your life the way you see fit, so long as you don't hurt people and don't take their stuff.
That's wonderful. I remember seeing you guys have some of the best merch at Free Your People. It's really great. The stickers, the T-shirts, the bags, that's all amazing. And those messages are really simple. And I think in the US, what you guys have that we just don't have in the UK is that concept of liberty. That idea, people know what it means, even if they don't believe in it necessarily. If you use the word liberty in the UK, and I often do, but people don't really understand what it means, and there isn't that kind of fundamental concept. So how would both of you define it, and why do you think it's so different and sort of stronger in the US than it is everywhere else?
It's... and I'll quote another dead economist, and Terry loves it when I do that. But, Hayek wrote this great piece, Why I'm Not a Conservative.
Yes.
Why he's frustrated.
Did the Constitution of Liberty.
He's frustrated about labels, right? And he's like, I need a word to explain who we are. And unfortunately, all the labels I think fail because even words like freedom and liberty are loaded. Maybe they're misunderstood, which is why we like to focus more on common values instead of labels. So, which is why I'm constantly saying what I believe in is a world where people are free to pursue their own dreams as long as they don't hurt people or take their stuff. And we find that, and I'd be curious. I suspect that would resonate here as well, because that's basically what your mom taught you.
Yeah.
Like, don't be an a-hole.
Right. Well, and I'm going to say something that might be controversial since we're here in the UK, but the United States was founded on the ideas of people seeking their own personal freedom and liberty from a slightly more oppressive government. And so
You're welcome.
And so it's really ingrained in our DNA. I mean, America is founded on immigrants, and they have all come to the United States searching for a better life. I mean, I'm Irish and German descent. I mean, my Irish descendants fled the potato famine and came to the U.S. And you find that even, today people are still coming to our country because they can find their freedom and the opportunity to succeed where they can't do that at home.
But Terry mentioned this. So it was interesting to me that the Liberty Food Fest was primarily people who they're in agriculture and they're getting screwed by the government. They're getting screwed by regulations, taxes, you name it. Like, they have this list of grievances that sounds like an angry libertarian list of grievances, but they come from where they thought they were on the left, and now they're trying to rearrange their worldview to understand that all of this top-down authoritarianism that dictates what they can plant, when they can plant, if they can plant, who they can sell to, these are basically the issue set for what we now call Make America Healthy Again in the United States. And it is fascinating to watch people primarily coming from the left realizing that they were more libertarian all along, but they didn't identify with that word.
Right.
They identified with the values of being free to farm, free to take more responsibility for your own health, not trusting the collusion of big corporations and big business that were telling us what was healthy when in fact the opposite was true. That's a wonderful opportunity that I think has a potential global impact. Just realizing that these central plans that they have for us are not all they're meant to be.
I think it's really interesting, especially with reference to Hayek. I mean, we mentioned spontaneous order, and this podcast in some ways is a result of spontaneous order. I mean, the REA was founded with Hayek's recommendation. It was Anthony Fisher that went to find Hayek at LSE after reading a Reader's Digest version of Road to Serfdom, and Hayek said, don't become a politician because you're going to be bound by political incentives. Go and win the battle of ideas. And in so many ways, that is why he founded the IEA. But in so many ways, I think that is where the message is coming from. I'm kind of of the view that everything that I believe has already been written, but the communication isn't there, and that we need to make these ideas popular. And you guys are so brilliant at that. I mean, you really are so great at really breaking down these concepts, but also making them seem cool and making them seem popular. And I think that that's really where the movement needs more people like you, to be quite frank. I think what's interesting from, even just from an economics perspective, this idea that actually we're talking about what is inflation. I think most people don't know what that means. And I think that's just one particular example of an economic concept that is so important, because it eats into people's everyday life. I mean, it is the cost of living. Right, if we're talking about the cost of living crisis, inflation is the cost of living. So on inflation specifically, how do you guys find, what do you guys think is the best way to communicate the causes of inflation and also these solutions to, potential solutions in the future?
I mean, I think the rules for us is always make it personal, make it relatable. And if you can find somebody, an actual person that is suffering the consequences of inflation, have them tell the story for us, because it is like we have a lot of politicians, I'm sure you do as well, who are now blaming those greedy corporations for ratcheting up prices, and they've yet to explain to me why they didn't do it before, if in fact they had this magic wand. But they're deflecting because there's only so many ways you can spend other people's money. You can tax up until a point, and then you get diminishing returns on taxation because people with wealth have a way to dodge those taxes, or people just stop working and people don't want to give all their money to the government. You can then borrow, but you can only borrow so much money that you don't have. So eventually you have to create that wealth out of thin air. And that's the period that we're in this country where the central bank, under pressure from the government that's spending too much money doesn't have, just debases our currency. It's as if they're literally stealing money out of your wallet, because that's the net effect of it. And we have to get people to understand that there is no free lunch, and every time the government spends money it doesn't have, they're either taking it from you explicitly through taxes, or they're picking it out of your pocket. There's no way around it.
Through expanding the money supply and ultimately reducing the value of their debt, I suppose. That's interesting. And Terry, from your perspective, making the ideas for liberty, we could talk about it on a podcast and it sounds great. However, in reality, there are quite a few boundaries. I'm going to use a couple of examples from the UK. So, for example, the government are currently, there's legislation going to Parliament at the moment called the Tobacco Vapes Bill. And this legislation will make it illegal for anybody that was born after the 1st of January 2009 to ever buy tobacco products. So we're going to be in a situation in the UK where a 25-year-old will be legally allowed to buy tobacco products, and a 24-year-old will not be able to legally buy tobacco products. So an entire generation of people, of adults, are going to be treated as though they'll be children forever. And there's obviously the kind of, from a human rights perspective, these are adults that will have different fundamental rights than other adults, even if you don't care about the tobacco specifically, but it is the principle of it, right? It sets a precedent. And it is an incredibly popular policy. The public love it. The mums on Mumsnet are so happy that the government is finally cracking down on tobacco use in this country, despite the fact, by the way, that smoking rates have declined, literally plummeted significantly. And the UK has, up until the last 2 years, been a world leader on tobacco harm reduction, where adults have been able to choose vaping products or other reduced harm products, and they have been able to make clever choices, and they've tend to at least make more clever choices as time goes on and as information is being communicated. And yet the government has seen all of this evidence and decided, no, you know what we're going to do? We're going to go ahead with a ban anyway. And it's so popular. How do you combat that? How do you combat the mums and mums that say, well, what, you want my kids to smoke?
Well, of course you don't want the children to smoke, right? You want them to make rational, educated decisions. And that is the most insane law that I've ever heard of, by the way. Because obviously you're going to set up a black market. Yes. There's always a way to get around every law and every regulation. People are smart, and that's what will happen. Look at countries where they have, legalized drugs, right? That led to less overdoses, less deaths, less harm. So you make things safe with warnings, but banning things just makes it more cool to do. Yes. So it's going to have the adverse effect.
It does. And it's quite funny. It's like, just because the government bans something doesn't mean that it doesn't exist in the black market.
Right.
Marijuana is currently illegal in the UK, but if you turn on any street corner, you will almost certainly smell it. And you're absolutely right. It's taking a product that is currently legal from the taxed and regulated private sector and give it to criminal gangs. Like, there's no third option in which tobacco is not provided by anybody because a fifth of adults smoke. So the products are going to be provided by somebody. The next generation of people are going to be using nicotine, and they're going to probably be using unsafe products that are on the black market that are completely unregulated in that way. The logical arguments we're talking about right now do not hit home. Right. We have conversations like this every day, and not just about tobacco, but also about so many other issues. But I think this is the most pernicious policies that we see at the moment, and yet those ideas are not being communicated. The idea that adults should be free to pursue their own lives and make their own choices is not being communicated.
Yeah, I mean, you can go back to prohibition, right?
Yes.
Like in the United States, suddenly alcohol was illegal. The number of speakeasies like quadrupled in New York City alone. There were so many other ways to get around it, and people were making illegal moonshine that was causing irreparable harm to many people. And so those are the messages that I think that need to come out. I mean, you can't ban a substance once it's already there. People will always find
Okay,
a way.
great Hayek quote, which
here he
is
is
actually
again.
a true Hayek quote. And we give this talk about whiskey, and this is one of our favorite lines. He was in New York City during Prohibition, and he says, "I have never drank so much as I did in New York when it was illegal." And
That's a great quote.
Yeah.
I like that.
And like the government loves to declare war on things like the war on tobacco, the war on drugs, the war on poverty,
The war on rock music in the communist countries.
the war on rock music. Well, we did that in our country as well. My hero Frank Zappa took on Tipper Gore when we tried to effectively limit young people's access to rock and roll, because that's something we need to stop. But every war that the government declares, when we declared a war on poverty in the United States, poverty has been increasing as a percent every single year. So we end up creating more of the thing that we're trying to stop. And it comes down to whether or not you trust people to make adult decisions. And maybe this is an ideological argument, but I think when go back to the food question. When it comes to harm reduction and when it comes to responsibility, who's going to do it better? Are you going to do it better? Do you want to actually decide what you're going to eat and be responsible for your own health? Or do you want a faceless bureaucrat in some nameless agency to do it for you? I think we can make those arguments with a combination of the philosophy of self-respect, but also very practical arguments as to what actually happens. If you are going to ban tobacco products, you're going to create a black market, and it's going to be just like the war on drugs.
Just like the war on drugs.
And doesn't every mother know that if you tell your child, no, they can't do it, they just want to do it even more?
That's true. That is very true. I don't have kids of my own. I'm too young, but I think that every mother and every parent,
Yes.
and indeed anybody that's ever been around a child,
The babysitter, aunt, uncle. Yeah.
you know what happens. You know what happens. It's great, and it's so funny because there is that we call it the nanny state, right?
Yes.
This is the government behaving like nanny. And much before I was ever interested in policy or indeed in ideas of liberty, there was a campaign against plain packaging, because a lot of the conversations were about the fact that on lifestyle issues itself, this is the government going down a slippery slope and it's going to get worse. Now, we were talking about indoor smoking bans and plain packaging in the early 2000s. The government have just last month said that they are going to or look into banning junk food advertisement online, which includes things like yogurt and porridge. So the slippery slope has literally, I mean, they call it a fallacy, but I think it's been proven to be true in the UK. Tell me about Free the People. How did it come about? And, well, first of all, what is Free the People? And tell me how it came about and why you guys have decided to pursue this organization and your journey and the mission.
So we started Free the People in 2016. We were working for FreedomWorks. He had actually founded it and ran it. I was doing fundraising there. And FreedomWorks became a very political organization involved in politics and elections and all of that, which is great. But we saw that some of the people, some of the members weren't necessarily well schooled in the ideas. So we wanted to get back to that. We wanted to get back to the ideas and reaching people. We didn't necessarily start out knowing that we're going to basically become a video production company. But that's just how we've evolved, recognizing that, you reach more people through short videos and YouTube. And, it used to be Facebook, but that doesn't really work that much anymore. I was just this summer giving a talk in France about the communication of ideas. And so I gave my speech, right? Stories, comedy, make it personal. And I was confronted by someone after the talk. He spent 10 minutes speaking in French, basically saying that I was a complete idiot, that I didn't know what I was talking about. And the only way that you're ever going to get people to come to our side is they just had to read all of the books. And my response is, well, how do you get them to read the books? You get them to read the books by introducing them to our ideas in a popular way through comedy, videos, and that sort of thing. And we just recognize that this is the best, what we feel is the best path forward. There are a lot of groups out there that are doing great white papers and policy books and all of that. My joke is that the only way you're going to change the everyday person's mind with a white paper is if you hit them upside the head with it, maybe. And that video storytelling is the path forward. And you can do it and reach a wide audience without a whole lot of money. You don't have to print books and all of that. So
it's a bit like the gateway drug to the real hardcore stuff, which is the books and the tech.
When you think about the various gateway drugs over the years, because for my generation, it was a novel by Ayn Rand or maybe a rock album by Rush. For Sir Anthony Fitcher's generation, it was the Reader's Digest version of The Road to Serfdom, which in fact, The Road to Serfdom was a more pop culture version of Hayek, if you've ever tried to slog through his other stuff. Fast forward to, maybe 10, 15 years ago, there was the Ron Paul generation, turned on, and this is in the American context, turned on by this guy, talking about ending the Fed and being not an interventionist in war and dropping these names of these economists because the internet was around by then and they could, like, who's this Mises guy? They could Google it. But if you talk to young people today, they have an infinite number of entry points to where they discovered the ideas of liberty, podcasts, videos, TikToks, whatever it is. You have to be that gateway drug that turns them on to thinking about ideas and values. And not everybody's going to read the books. And I don't even think that's a reasonable goal, all due respect to your angry old French guy. But you don't need to, because so much of what I think we're talking about is common sense. And I think people all over the political spectrum are hungry for a different way of thinking about things. And, too often, like if they come from the left and they realize that the left is too authoritarian for them, maybe they're going to join the authoritarian right instead. It's like, no, there's this other way of thinking about the world that's not really looking to dictate the terms of your life to anybody. And this, to me, is like the tremendous opportunity, right? Like, we've never been able to reach an audience as big as the one we can speak to today. So we should be thinking about it as a marketing project in a fundamentally different way than when Sir Anthony Fitcher told Hayek, "Don't be a politician, start a think tank."
That's really interesting. I think also from that perspective, what Free the People aims to do, I suppose, is, and I know I'll put words in your mouth, but it's sort of in a way to communicate these ideas, but in that gateway drug way, and it be that Reader's Digest version of those ideas. And today we've got social media has changed in the last 5 years.
5 days.
5 days, let alone the last decade or 20 years. And actually reaching young people is so difficult. So there was some polling done by the Fraser Institute. I think it was commissioned by the Fraser Institute, but it was done by Lega. And they found that I think it was 53% of 18 to 34-year-olds in the UK believe that socialism is the ideal economic system. In the US, it's about the same, and in Canada. So we're talking about half of 18 to 34-year-olds think that socialism is the ideal economic system. So there is something going wrong. I think that, so I am Gen Z for my sins. And I think that there seems to be...
So it's your fault.
So it's all my fault, guys. It's my fault. There seems to be a disconnect between where these ideas are being reached. And I think actually in the quote-unquote liberty movement as a whole, a lot of the work that is being done isn't always reaching that younger audience. And they are the future. We are the future, unfortunately, whether we like it or not. So I think you guys have sort of been able to reach that audience. How do you do that?
Well, I mean, it's easy. It's social media. And it's presenting your ideas not in a way that you lecture, that you make them, again, like approachable and give examples. We did a film. We Matt's obsessed about COVID and the lockdowns and all of that still to this day. And we did a film in the middle of the pandemic about a family in New York City. And they owned a bar, family restaurant, that was shut down. And in the middle of this shutdown, while they're trying to keep paying their, employees, their son was diagnosed with a terrible disease, was not able to get the care that he should have been able to, because in New York, they declared that if you didn't have COVID, you couldn't get the medical treatment. Like, it was insane. And so their son subsequently died because of this horrible, traumatic story. And we did a documentary about this. And we didn't rail against the government. We didn't cite statistics. We didn't mention the mayor by name. We just told the story, and we ended up getting picked up at some of the New York City film festivals, which is kind of amazing in and of itself, because they're not necessarily of our political viewings. And at one of them, we won Best COVID Film. And we presented like just the antithesis to what the state had done to them. And it opened up people's eyes. And I think that that's the way that you do it. And everything that we do, whether it's long form videos, we will still always then go back in and clip shorts so that you can put them on TikTok and you can put them on YouTube and Facebook. And so you start with the shorts and you just keep growing your audience, recognizing that your generation gets most of their news from TikTok, which is truly frightening.
It is frightening. They use it as a search engine. What is the most powerful story that you guys have told?
The most devastating. We had to stop doing these because they were making us all very depressed, because we actually tried to tackle the problem of young people being turned on by socialism. And again, I think it's a label thing, but what we did is we talked to some of the victims of socialism, and we went back in the history of Mao's experiment, the Great Leap Forward, and just the human, like the devastating human catastrophe that it was. It's such a dark story. We had to stop telling them. But like our friend Lee Schooland, who grew up during Mao's Cultural Revolution, we actually got her to start telling stories that she had never told before about how neighbors turned against them because they were the wrong kind of family. They were not they were not a red family. They were a black family, and there were two classes of citizens. And if you were a black family, you were punished and jailed and beaten and on and on and on. So I think those kinds of stories can really affect people. But conversely, and we struggle with this because ultimately we need to tell uplifting stories about the beautiful things that happen when people are free to pursue their dreams. And we just released a film
called The Free Life, Portrait of an Artist. And it's great how we can sometimes finish each other's sentences. The Free Life is the story of this amazing Cuban artist named Carlos Luna. And he left Cuba when he was 20 so that he could live his true artistic life. When he was 13 years old, his grandmother told him that he was going to have to leave Cuba if he wanted to be a true artist. When he was in high school, he did a series of drawings of Jose Marti, a very important poet. And his teacher told him, be careful. You're on the edge. People are watching. So he gave up everything at 20, moved to Mexico, and then ultimately found his way to the United States. So we tell this story, and we tell the beautiful things that have happened to him since he came to America. And he's an incredibly successful artist. But we also talk about the fact that he's never been able to go back to Cuba. He wasn't able to see his parents or his father. And it's very, very difficult for him. And his art is amazing, and he does beautiful paintings of women in a very impressionistic style. But he also does some pretty awesome anti-Fidel paintings as well. I mean, a picture of someone cutting off Fidel's head. It's kind of like the Perseus and Medusa scene. And so he's always told his story through his paintbrush. But with the release of this film, and we've shown it a couple of times in Latin America, he's now becoming a rock star and being invited to speak, to tell his story.
Wow.
And so I think it's nothing that we ever anticipated happening, but the fact that he can now tell his story in multiple ways is just truly phenomenal. And again, you don't know how many people he will reach that way. We just did a screening of this film in a small town in New Jersey outside of New York City that has a heavy Cuban population. And a teacher from Rutgers brought a bunch of students in that were from Latin America, from Venezuela and Cuba and all of that. And after the screening, they just swarmed Carlos because they had never heard that story before. And so that was one of the reasons why we wanted to tell this story, because second and third generations of immigrants don't know what their families gave up to come here. And, they now think that socialism is cool. And if you show them it's actually not, that makes a huge impact.
It is really sad. We had one of our former interns, Jesus Anmas. He was arbitrarily detained by the Venezuelan government recently. And he had so many friends across the UK and in the US. He studied at Bristol University in the UK, interned with us, I think, back in 2020. And we've been trying to do everything that we could to tell his story. What I found really interesting is actually, this has only happened in the last week or so at the time of filming. What I found really interesting is actually people that know the IE through Westminster and know our impact in SW1 have no idea that this was the real impact of these people, and any of our interns would end up getting fantastic freedom fighters in their countries. And the fact that, the reality is we still don't know that he is safe. Right. We still don't know where he is. And there are reports that he has been detained into one of the sort of torture centres. So there are, your mind could go on and on and on. And it is some of those stories, I think, do tell us exactly what they're like. And I was talking to his girlfriend on WhatsApp, and I was sort of saying, we're trying to do everything that we can. But what's really interesting is the storytelling increases the political importance of those people. But there are 2,000 political prisoners at the moment in Maduro's regime in Venezuela. Like we can't reach all of those people. And so if we can avoid getting there in the first place, that would be ideal. So I think it's really wonderful that you've been able to do that. And actually the multiplying effect of communicating that person's story means that there are probably thousands, if not millions of people that could then be impacted by that. And maybe they'll end up to go and tell their story one day as well. We've been talking for a very long time. I do want to hear a little bit about your perspectives on the future, and especially what's going on in the US. So we're entering a year where Trump is going to be president. And I think that from at least my assessment of the situation, I want to hear what you guys think, is there's a lot of exciting stuff when it comes to Elon Musk's Doge, and potentially the idea that we can, the government should be cutting public spending, that the size of the state should be reduced, that there's a lot of bureaucratic waste, and that regulation should be cut. And at the same time, Trump say we're going to impose 20% global tariffs. So what do you guys think is happening, and do you feel positive for the future of the US?
With any incoming administration, it's always the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Yeah.
You don't know what they're going to actually do when they get into office. There's campaign promises, and then there's campaign promises, right? And so we're taking the stance where we're going to focus on the good and try to influence that happening, rather than, as libertarians, we could spend all of our time complaining about all of the horrible things that politicians are going to do. Right. And so for the sake of our personal mental health, we're going to focus on the good things. So focusing on Doge and some of the Make America Healthy, activities. As far as the tariffs, I think a lot of that is Trump bluster.
Yes.
And it's a negotiating tactic, right? So he said he's going to impose these tariffs on Canada. And so what happened? Trudeau hopped on a plane and went to Mar-a-Lago and said, what can I do so that these don't happen? And, Trump said, we'll just make Canada the 51st state and it won't be a problem anymore. But
it's crazy.
What do you think about that? We've been having trade wars with Canada ever since I was a 22-year-old policy analyst, and I wrote papers about it back then. But I think I'll use a specific example of why I would be hopeful. As Terry's mentioned, I've obsessed about lockdowns and the COVID industrial complex, as I call it. One of my frequent guests, who is now the star in a new series we have produced called The Cover-Up, is Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, who is a Stanford epidemiologist, also a huge fan of Hayek. So
he's also a PhD economist.
So by the way, the Venn diagram of rational epidemiologists and Hayekian economists is is one dude.
One guy, and you found.
We found him. He is now. He became sort of a dissident rock star, infamously targeted by Fauci and the NIH and the censorship industrial complex that emerged to stop COVID misinformation. He has been nominated by Trump to run the NIH, and that could not be a bigger swing. I'm going to argue that the reason he was nominated is because Jay is
A rock star.
a rock star. He's willing to go on any show, and he's willing to tell the story, and he's done it 1,000 times, and he has a huge social media following, and frankly, this is why we always say that politics is downstream of culture, and Trump is sort of almost a caricature of this rule. If you're trending on Twitter, if you're Elon Musk, if you're on Joe Rogan, if you are Jay Bhattacharya, if you are Tulsi Gabbard, there's another guy that has been nominated to run the FDA, Dr. Marty Makary is another fantastic voice out there. These guys are all social media influencers who also happen to be very capable at the work that they do. I think Trump will listen to the crowd, for better or worse. So it's kind of our job to make sure that the crowd is pushing the good guys and the good ideas and supporting them when they do the right thing and pushing back when they don't. Now, we're all good at pushing back and just complaining. But I'd rather the center of gravity went towards the people doing the right things, such as DOGE, right? DOGE is a independent commission, arguably without any legislative authority whatsoever. But between Vivek Ramaswamy and Elon Musk, they have some of the biggest megaphones in the world. And that means that they can help us put pressure on members of Congress to actually do some of the things that they propose. We'll see what happens. But honestly, if it was another legislative committee, it would produce nothing, because the legislators are how we got here in the first place.
Yes. And this is sort of you guys saying that you, broadly speaking, feel quite optimistic about, or you want to focus on the optimistic parts of what the next few years can
We have to be optimistic now, and we can come back in 2 years and talk about all the things that, again, didn't get solved. But right now, it's to me, it's the biggest opportunity I've seen since the 2010 Tea Party election, and we'll see if we have any luck.
That is so wonderful, and I love ending an optimistic note. That's really great. Thank you. Thank you so much to both of you. I mean, this has been really, really fascinating conversation. Thank you, Matt, and thank you, Terry.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, and thank you to all of you for watching or listening. If you are interested in learning more about the IEA's work, then check out Insider on insider.iea.org.uk. Thank you.